All right, welcome back. It's great to have you all with us again as we continue our deep dive into building a climate resilient future.
Yes, welcome back.
You guys have been with us through the thick of it, learning about the science behind climate change. We've talked about the foundations of resilience, and now it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty and really see how different parts of our world are adapting.
That's right.
We're going to roll up our sleeves.
Let's get practical.
We're going to be talking about everything from making our cities more resilient to future-proofing our food, safeguarding our precious water, and protecting public health when it comes to the effects of climate change.
Yeah, these are the front lines.
So with that, let's jump right in.
Sounds good.
Let's start with Chapter 6, which is all about urban planning and infrastructure. I think this chapter does a really great job of painting a picture of how vulnerable our cities are to climate change. I mean, you think about it, right? Millions of people packed into these concrete jungles. There's infrastructure everywhere. What happens when the heat waves hit, when storms surge, or when water becomes scarce?
Well, you're absolutely right that concentration of people and all that infrastructure definitely makes cities super vulnerable. But, it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay.
Cities are also these incredible hubs of innovation. So not only are they on the front lines of climate impacts, but they're also leading the charge when it comes to adaptation strategies. What's really cool is that the things they're trying, if they work, can be models for other cities all over the world.
Ooh, I like that. Models for resilience.
Exactly.
Like beacons of resilience.
Yeah. Showing everyone what's possible.
Okay, so what kind of strategies are we talking about here? What are these cities doing?
Well, the source talks about a bunch of approaches, but there are really two big things that stand out to me. The first is climate resilient urban planning. So it's not just about planning for today, it's about taking climate risk into account for every decision they make. So we're talking about zoning regulations, building codes, permits. It's about building with the future in mind.
So it's not just about where we build.
Nope.
It's how we build, right?
Yeah.
Like building for a different future.
Exactly. It's almost like designing cities for a whole new planet.
Okay.
And that leads us to the second big thing I wanted to talk about, which is green infrastructure. We're talking about incorporating nature into the city. So that means urban forests, green roofs, parks that are designed to do more than just look pretty.
Okay, I'm picturing those rooftop gardens you see in some cities.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, how does that translate into resilience? Because it seems a bit cosmetic to me.
Yeah, it's definitely not just about aesthetics. Let's take those green roofs as an example. Did you know that they can actually reduce stormwater runoff by as much as 75%? That's huge because it means less flooding, less stress on the drainage systems. Plus, they can actually act as insulation, meaning buildings don't have to use as much energy for cooling.
Wow, 75%.
Yeah.
I did not realize that they had that much of an impact.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see now how nature-based solutions like that can really make a difference.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to something that I know is probably on everyone's mind when we talk about resilience, and that's food.
Right.
So Chapter 7 talks about agriculture and food security. And I mean, these days, who isn't thinking about the future of food? The chapter points out this really complicated relationship that agriculture has with climate change. It's both impacted by it and it contributes to it.
Yeah, it's like a double-edged sword. And it makes adapting agricultural practices that much more urgent. We've got to make sure we can feed everyone in the future.
I've got to admit, when I was reading that chapter, I had a little bit of a panic moment. Like, should I be stocking up on canned goods? Just kidding. Shrub. 4. But seriously, what can we do to avoid food shortages as the climate changes? What are the most promising solutions out there?
Well, I don't think you need to start building a bunker just yet. There's so much innovation happening in agriculture. Researchers and farmers are working really hard to find solutions. And one really exciting area is the development of climate-resilient crops.
Climate-resilient crops. That sounds promising. So what are we talking about here? How are scientists making these super crops, these climate-fighting crops?
Well, the thing is, different regions face different climate threats.
Right.
So the solutions can't be one size fits all. In parts of Africa, for instance, where droughts are becoming more severe, scientists are developing drought-tolerant maize varieties. And in places like Southeast Asia, which is prone to more rainfall and flooding, they're developing flood-resistant rice.
Wow, so they're tailoring these solutions.
Exactly. It's like custom designing a suit of armor for each crop. You're protecting it from whatever climate risks it faces.
That makes a lot of sense. Speaking of resources that are essential for life and building on what we were just talking about, let's talk about water.
Okay.
Chapter 8 is all about water resources management, and I think we can all agree that water scarcity is a major concern already in so many parts of the world. Climate change is only making that worse.
Absolutely. It's like turning up the heat on an already simmering pot. We have to figure out how to manage water sustainably. There's this concept called Integrated Water Resource Management, IWRM for short.
IWRM, okay. That sounds a little bit like a policy wonk term. What does that actually mean for, say, a city that's dealing with water scarcity? Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah. IWRM is about taking this big picture view of water. It's about recognizing that water isn't just about pipes and infrastructure. It's about people. It's about the environment. It's about the economy. So you can imagine a city trying to make sure there's enough water for everyone to drink, enough for industry, enough for ecosystems to stay healthy, and all of this while dealing with the effects of climate change. That's IWRM in action.
So it's like this giant balancing act.
It is.
Trying to juggle all these different needs while also making sure there's enough water left over for nature.
Exactly.
It sounds tricky.
Oh, it definitely is, especially with climate change making things so unpredictable. But there are some interesting strategies that cities are trying. Things like improving water efficiency, especially in agriculture and industry. We've got to do more with less water. Also, protecting water quality is going to be really important, especially as pollution becomes more widespread. And of course, strengthening water storage and water harvesting, capturing rainwater, recharge and groundwater that can really help create a buffer against these unpredictable rainfall patterns.
So it's all about getting smarter with how we use, manage, and protect water. Right?
Yes.
Really thinking long term, recognizing that water is essential to life.
Exactly.
Like we have to take care of our water systems the same way we take care of our own health.
I love that analogy. It's so true. You know, it's funny how we often take water for granted until there isn't enough. Speaking of things we tend to overlook, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about public health.
Okay.
Chapter 9 is all about public health and climate change, and I think this connection often gets lost in the shuffle, but climate change really does pose some serious risks to our health.
Yeah, it's true. We often hear about the impacts of climate change on the environment, but the health impacts can be just as bad, if not worse. What are we talking about here specifically? How can climate change affect our health?
Well, there are direct impacts like heat stress.
Right.
As temperatures rise, especially in cities, we're going to see more heat-related illnesses and deaths. And then there's the spread of infectious diseases as climate patterns change. Insects that carry diseases like malaria, dengue fever, they can spread to new areas, putting more people at risk.
It's like climate change is expanding their territory.
Exactly. It's pretty scary when you think about it. And those are just the direct impacts. We also have to think about the indirect impacts too.
Okay, like what?
Well, things like food security and nutrition. If climate change disrupts agriculture, makes it harder to grow food, that's going to have a huge impact on people's health. And then there are the mental health impacts, dealing with extreme weather events, being displaced from your home, losing your livelihood. All of that takes a toll.
Wow, it really is like this ripple effect, isn't it? Climate change is touching every part of our lives. It's kind of overwhelming when you think about it. So what can we do to protect ourselves? How do we protect our communities from these health risks?
Well, the source outlines a few things we can do. First, we need to make sure our healthcare systems are prepared. That means making sure hospitals and clinics and emergency services are able to withstand extreme weather, that they can still operate even during a crisis.
So we're talking about things like backup power, enough supplies, climate-resilient facilities.
Exactly. We also need good early warning systems. If we can predict heat waves, infectious disease outbreaks, things like that, we can give communities the time to prepare.
Right. Being proactive is key.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not just about infrastructure and early warning systems. Education is huge. People need to understand the risks climate change poses to their health, and they need to know what they can do to stay safe.
Knowledge is power, right.
Exactly. The more we know, the better equipped we are to adapt. Speaking of adaptation, let's talk about the money.
Okay.
Chapter 10 is all about economic resilience and financing adaptation. Let's be real, adapting to climate change is going to cost money. So where's all that money going to come from?
That's the million-dollar question, literally.
Right. But I think we need to change the way we think about this. Instead of seeing adaptation as a cost, we need to see it as an investment in our future.
I like that. Reframing it as an investment. But how do we convince governments, businesses, investors that putting money into climate adaptation is a good idea?
Well, think about the benefits. If we invest in adaptation now, we can avoid much larger costs in the future. Think about a major hurricane hitting a coastal city that hasn't invested in flood defenses. The cost of cleanup, rebuilding, the lost productivity, it's enormous.
It's like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. Investing now saves us a lot of trouble later, but the question remains, how do we make this investment happen, especially in developing countries? They're hit hardest by climate change, but they often have the least resources.
Right.
This is where things get interesting. The source talks about new financial tools like green bonds and climate funds. These are ways to specifically channel money toward projects that address climate change, including adaptation.
Okay, so green bonds, climate funds. Are we saying Wall Street is starting to pay attention to climate change?
It seems that way. There's definitely growing momentum to address this issue. Public-private partnerships are important too.
Okay, so it's not all on the government then?
Not at all. It's a team effort. We need everyone working together.
It really is about shared responsibility, recognizing we all have a stake in this.
Absolutely. We all benefit from a climate-resilient world. It's about recognizing that our economy and our planet are connected. We can't have one without the other.
Well, you're making me feel a little bit more optimistic. It's easy to get overwhelmed by all the doom and gloom surrounding climate change. But hearing about these new solutions, these financial tools, it makes me think, hey, maybe we can do this.
I think we can too. It's going to be tough. It's going to take a lot of hard work and creativity, but I think we can pull it off. And that's what makes learning about climate resilience so interesting. It's not just about surviving. It's about thriving in a changing world.
I love that. It's not just about weathering the storm. It's about building something even better afterward. It's about taking this challenge and using it as an opportunity to create a better future for everyone.
Exactly.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. It's been quite a journey so far, hasn't it? We've talked about the science, we've explored the foundations of resilience, we've really dug deep into those sector-specific adaptation strategies, and we've uncovered a lot of the connections that kind of tie it all together.
It's like putting together this big puzzle, and each piece we find reveals something new about what it means to be resilient in a changing climate.
Exactly. We're finally seeing that bigger picture emerge. But before we wrap up, I have a question. We've talked about all these amazing adaptation strategies, but how do we know what actually works? How do we make sure we're on the right track? I think Chapter 15, monitoring, reporting, and evaluating adaptation, might have some answers for us.
Right. It's like having a feedback loop. Right.
Yep.
A way to see what's working, learn from our mistakes. This chapter really emphasizes the importance of not just doing something, but also keeping track of how it's going, measuring its impact. It's not enough to just say, oh, we planted a bunch of trees, so we're good. We need to actually know if those trees are doing what we want them to do. Are they actually making the city cooler, for instance?
So it's like a science experiment.
Exactly.
We have our hypothesis, we implement it, and then we gather data to see if it's actually working. It sounds like accountability is really important here.
Oh, absolutely. We need clear goals, ways to measure if we're meeting those goals. Transparency is key too. If something isn't working, we need to be honest about that and figure out why. That way we can adjust our approach as we go and make sure we're getting the most out of our adaptation efforts.
It's all about learning and evolving. I mean, that's really the essence of resilience, right? Being able to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that ability to adapt is even more important when we think about all the new technologies that are emerging, which actually brings us perfectly to our final chapter, Chapter 16, Innovation and Future Directions in Climate Adaptation. I have to say, this chapter is just bursting with exciting ideas. So many possibilities.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's hear about the future. What are some of the game-changing innovations that are on the horizon? What's going to totally revolutionize the way we adapt to climate change?
Well, we're seeing some incredible breakthroughs in climate-smart agriculture. Think about tools that use sensors and data to figure out exactly how much water and fertilizer crops need. That could really help us reduce waste and boost efficiency. Or early warning systems that can predict extreme weather events like heat waves or storms with amazing accuracy using artificial intelligence. That could give communities so much more time to prepare. And we can't forget about building materials that can actually withstand climate stressors. That could make our infrastructure so much more resilient.
Wow, it really does feel like we're moving into a whole new era of climate adaptation, where technology is going to play a huge role.
It really does. But it's not just about all the fancy tech. We also have to remember the solutions that nature already provides. This chapter talks a lot about things like restoring ecosystems, creating green infrastructure. It's about working with nature, not against it, to build resilience, like restoring wetlands to protect coastlines from storm surges or planting trees to help regulate water cycles and prevent erosion.
It's like we're rediscovering how much we can learn from nature. It already has so many of the answers we're looking for.
You got it. And at the end of the day, the most important innovation of all might just be this growing understanding that we can't do this alone. We need everyone working together. Governments, researchers, businesses, communities, indigenous people, we all have a role to play.
It's that idea of collective action, right? Pooling our knowledge, our resources, our creativity. It's a reminder that even with something as massive as climate change, we can make a difference if we work together.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I really hope you're leaving not just with more knowledge, but also with a sense of hope, a feeling that you can be a part of the solution.
I definitely am. We've learned so much about the science, the strategies, the challenges, but also the opportunities. It's inspiring to see all the incredible work that's being done to build a more resilient future.
What really stood out to you? Anything in particular that you'll take away from this whole deep dive?
For me, it was seeing how creative and dedicated people are all over the world. It gives me hope that even with such a huge challenge ahead of us, we can adapt, we can innovate, we can create a world where humanity thrives.
That's a great takeaway. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope you've learned some valuable things along the way and that you'll continue to be part of this important conversation about building a climate resilient future.
Absolutely. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep taking action, everyone. Remember, even the smallest steps towards a more resilient future can have a ripple effect. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.